Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of On the Whistle. Now obviously we haven't got a game to talk about, but I'm quite keen to try and keep the content going for you here on YouTube over the course of the summer. So I'll try and check in every now and then, give you some transfer updates, everything that's happening at the club and what I'm kind of hearing. Was down interviewing Christian Speakman today at the Academy of Light. Now, as you can imagine, the sporting director didn't give too much away, certainly not when it came to individual names and your Jobe Bellinghams and the likes of Jordan Henderson. But I can certainly try and bring you up to speed a little bit with what I understand about what's going on and what I'm hearing from sources. First and foremost, I just want to draw your attention to what I think is an exciting announcement. I hope it's an exciting announcement for you guys as well. On the Whistle will be making its live debut late this month, Thursday the 26th of June at the Bridge Hotel Vaults. I'm going to be chatting all things Sunderland with my good friend Nick Barnes from BBC Radio Newcastle, and we'll be taking questions from any of you who fancy coming down. I'm going to put the details, hopefully, in the bio of this video. So if you fancy coming down and seeing the first episode, live edition of On the Whistle and getting involved, then click on the link and all the information you'll need is there. Fingers crossed a few of you fancy it. I'd love to see some friendly faces down there and hopefully get to meet a few of you and have a good night chatting all things Sunderland. Let's have a little chat about transfers in Sunderland and my latest understanding of how things are looking. So obviously the big one at the moment is Jobe Bellingham. Looks increasingly likely that he's going to leave Sunderland this summer, but as of yet no deal has been done. So I think it's been a little bit of an interesting one. Obviously a lot of very strong reports from Germany, from prominent newspapers there, from Sky Sports in Germany, saying that Bellingham has agreed to join Dortmund and that Dortmund are very confident about signing him. Now I think that's largely true. I think my understanding of the situation is that Bellingham has indicated to Dortmund that he's prepared to join them this summer, and Dortmund are clearly very, very keen to get a deal done. They would like to sign Bellingham before the Club World Cup starts later this month so they can be part of that squad. Now, there is a little bit of time pressure on this because, as you may or may not have known, there's a shortened transfer window which is currently opened. It opened last Sunday and it shuts again on the 10th of June. And that's to allow teams who are participating in the Club World Cup to get some business done before that tournament starts. So while there's no major time pressure for either club generally, Dortmund are keen to try and push this through before the Club World Cup starts. Now, from my understanding, Jobe Bellingham does have a release clause, probably in the region of around 40 million euros, which I think translates to about 34 million quid. Now, Dortmund's valuation, as I understand it, is lower than that. They value him at around initially, I think, 25 million euros, which would equate to about over 20 million pounds. Now, Sunderland clearly aren't going to sell him for anything that they believe is below their valuation. And so I expect them to stand relatively firm on that. I do think, if you want my personal opinion, that Bellingham will leave for Dortmund, and I suspect it will probably happen in the not too distant future. My feeling is that Sunderland will respect the fact that Bellingham obviously had a chance to join Premier League clubs last summer. He decided not to. He opted to stay and spearhead the push for promotion. He's been a brilliant servant all season, played a huge part in promotion. I think it's incredibly unlikely that Sunderland are going to put their foot down and stop him from departing. However, Dortmund do have to reach Sunderland's valuation. Bellingham's under contract until the summer of 2028. Sunderland are under no pressure to sell him immediately, and certainly not for less than what they feel is a fair valuation. What I would expect personally to happen at some stages for the two parties to meet in the middle. As I say, Bellingham's release clause works out. It's something around, somewhere in the mid 30 millions range. I imagine some kind of compromise will be reached where Sunderland end up with a total package that isn't far off that level, but it might be that some of it is wrapped up in future clauses and potential add-ons. And clearly, I would expect Sunderland to be negotiating hard for a decent sell-on clause, given the potential that we know Bellingham has to go on in his future career. I think that Sunderland did try and make a pitch to keep Bellingham. I think they will keep trying to make pitches to keep Bellingham. I think the expectation is, and where a lot of this sort of story begins, is I think everyone understands that if Sunderland hadn't got promoted, I think this is a deal that would have happened really, really quickly, because I think it would have been obvious that Bellingham would be moving on. I think for Sunderland, especially as a championship club, starting the transfer window with a fee, as I say, in the region of 25 million, maybe slightly lower, would have been, a very, very big financial boost for them as a championship club. I think that Sunderland's promotion has slowed things down and has put a few thoughts in in Bellingham's head as to whether he definitely wants to leave. It certainly gave the club a bit of a renewed energy to try and keep him. But I think all signs do indicate that Bellingham is likely to leave. I think it will be a bumper deal for Sunderland, and so there's a lot of positives to take from the fact that obviously they'll be turning a huge profit on a player that they signed 2 years ago. So as of yet, no deal agreed, and certainly it's incumbent on Dortmund in the following days, particularly if they want to get the deal done before this first mini transfer window shuts, to come forward with a more attractive package to Sunderland. But I can only give you my personal feel, and my expectation is that will likely happen at some stage over the next week. I think a speedy resolution is in Sunderland's interest because Bellingham is an important player. There's a big task on for the club to replace him in terms of those attributes that he brings to Sunderland's midfield. And so I would be surprised if, Sunderland didn't want a speedy resolution to this. But having said that, as I say, they're in a relatively strong financial position, and they're in a position where they can negotiate the best possible price for it. I don't think they'll stand in Bellingham's way, particularly not after, as I say, he turned down those opportunities to leave last summer. I'd be surprised if they stood in his way again. But I do think that, it's something that Dortmund are going to have to come forward and bring a lot more. Obviously, Sunderland have done their first transfer deal, a really, really exciting one. It's easy to kind of forget how exciting a deal it is just because we knew that Enzo Lefebvre was going to become a permanent Sunderland player. He signed a 4-year deal that'll go through on July the 1st. It's highly likely to become a club record signing. And once certain future add-ons are met, a really good positive start to the window. In terms of what I see Sunderland doing moving forward from there, I think relatively speaking, it is still obviously very early days in the window. I think that Sunderland are going to have to work quickly because they're obviously at a disadvantage having played in the playoffs. Most teams in the Premier League next season knew their divisional status much sooner than Sunderland did, and that obviously leaves them with a lot of work to do. But my understanding is that kind of significant shortlists have been drawn up, and obviously the hard work now starts on actually speaking to those targets and trying to get deals done. I think that generally speaking, my feeling from speaking to various people is that the Sunderland won't change their strategy completely. I think they're still predominantly going to try and invest in young talent who still have a lot of development to do. But I think there is definitely also an understanding that this is a huge step up to the Premier League. It is a significantly bigger step up from League One to the Championship. When Sunderland did add players, but a lot of the core of their team who were in League One obviously stepped up to the Championship. I do think Sunderland will give opportunities to most of the players who made up the core of the team last season, particularly in pre-season, to sort of prove that they can thrive at the level. But I do think that Sunderland are aware that they're going to add some significant quality to the squad if they have any chance of competing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few deals in the same kind of financial ballpark as the one that's brought Enzo Lefebvre to the club. I think we know a few things about Sunderland's way of operating by now. They like to run a lean squad, as lean as they possibly can. They want they want the entire squad to feel as if they're close to playing. They don't want disaffected players around the group who can potentially have a negative impact because they know they're not going to get in the team anytime soon. And so I expect that the strategy will be to try and recruit really, really high caliber players, quality rather than quantity. I really don't see someone going out and getting 12, 13 players for 8-9 million a pop. I think they will focus on trying to bring in some high caliber players in order to sort of who can come in and compete for the first team immediately and raise the level of the group. Now, I think that it's pretty clear, and one thing that Christian Smith did kind of allude to today was that they understand they're going to need to be quite flexible because of the jump. I would not be surprised if someone tried to bring in one or two more experienced players, potentially maybe on loan or potentially on a free transfer, just to get some top tier experience in that group. Whether that would be Jordan Henderson, we have to see. Certainly nothing particularly advanced on that at this stage. But I think there's clearly going to be a little bit of flexibility, because I think there's an understanding that you can't go into the level of the Premier League with entirely unproven players at the top tier level. So I think we'll see a little bit of a mix, but I do think the focus is going to be primarily on quality over quantity. I think the positions in which there is an obvious immediate need to recruit is quite clear. It's going to be, I think you need to build a depth at full-back and out on the wings. Clearly, the players who have played in those positions for Sunderland this season have done really well. And I'm talking about the likes of Trichy, Pratt Roberts, Romain Mundle. But there are areas where there's not a lot of depth and that needs to be addressed. I think it's also clear that, if Jobe Bellingham does leave, Sunderland need another central midfielder. That is absolutely obvious, even accounting for Enzo Lefebvre's arrival. And also you could probably do with a bit more depth at centre-half and up front as well. Whether Chris Mepham comes into that category, he may be part of the solution, but I think Sunderland will also be looking at other players to try and bolster those positions. So my expectation is that I think Sunderland will be ambitious, not in terms of volume of signings, but trying to recruit some really, really high quality players. But I think that what we have to also sort of acknowledge and understand as well is that this is a long-term strategy. And what Sunderland certainly won't be doing is committing to fairly reckless deals that could potentially really, really drag them down in future windows. I think Sunderland are hopeful that they can buck the trend in terms of trying to be one of the first teams in recent years who can go up to the Premier League and survive, but also acknowledging the scale of the challenge and ensuring that if the worst came to the worst and they did come back into the Championship, they were in an incredibly strong position, both in terms of not being saddled by huge contracts that would prevent them, going out and doing other business, but also ensuring that they have a squad that is ready to hit the ground running at that level again. I think there is a real determination and ambition to establish Sunderland in the Premier League, but it is something that's going to take a lot of time. So I think it's really exciting times to be following Sunderland, to be a Sunderland fan, to be covering Sunderland. I think we're going to see some really exciting names linked with the club. I think we're going to see Sunderland go out and show some ambition and try and do some deals. But as I say, I think the focus is going to be, some of you may have read my interview with Gus Poyet last week. He is obviously someone who knows the ownership group well. And one of the things he said was that he expects Sunderland to target a few specific positions and try and add key players in those positions, and that he expected Sunderland predominantly to try and mine those European markets for players where they think they can get better value and get some really, really high potential, high quality players. From what I'm hearing, speaking to other people, I expect that to be the case. I think we will see Sunderland kind of continue their strategy with maybe one or two little tweaks along the way. And certainly if there's an opportunity to add some kind of experience and proven top level experience to the group on a sensible deal, and then I think that's something that they'll do. So yeah, hopefully that brings you up to speed a little bit in terms of the transfer news. You'll have also seen that the retained list was released today. You can get some more information on that on the Echo website, and I'll have loads of sort of info on that over the next couple of days following up on that. No major surprises in that one in terms of confirming that Chris Mepham and Salis Abdul-Samed will return to their clubs at the end of their loan deals. I don't think that will be the end of the Chris Mepham story. I don't think it's guaranteed that he'll come back to Sunderland, but I certainly think if Bournemouth do decide to release him, which seems likely, I think Sunderland will be viewing that as a potential option. Obviously, both parties will then have a decision to make in terms of other interests, in terms of the financial side of things. And Mepham will have a big decision personally in terms of what he wants to do with his future, because he'll want to play regularly. That's the whole reason he came to Sunderland in the first place. So I think that is definitely one to watch. Otherwise, most of the major news was in the academy. Some players from the under-21s group have been released. Some who Sunderland have taken their options up on to extend their contracts for another year. As I say, all the information's on some of their websites, so you can go and have a read about that. Clearly, a big task for Christian Speakman is that the retained list basically confirms that none of the clubs who have had Sunderland's players on loan this season have taken up the options to buy them in the cases where that was the case, which means there are a lot of players coming back to the club this summer, and that's going to be something that Speakman needs to work on. I'm talking about players like Louis Hamir, Pereira Ekwar, Timothy Pembele, Nazari Russin. There's quite a few now. There are some who I've no doubt are going to attract interest, and who I think Sunderland will find it very easy to find new homes for. Nectar Triantis had a brilliant loan at Hibs. They're very keen to bring him back, and there are other clubs interested as well. So while I don't see it being a major long-term issue, and I don't think it's something that will impact Sunderland's transfer business this summer, there's clearly a little bit of work to do, and that'll be something that Speakman wants to work on, particularly because, as I've alluded to before, both himself and Regis Labrise are clear that they really don't want to have a bloated squad going into the new season, and make sure they have a really sort of lean and hungry group. So yeah, obviously a lot to discuss and a lot to catch up on. Hopefully that's brought you up to speed a little bit. Again, just to remind you, Thursday 26th of June, first ever live on the Whistle at the Bridge Hotel Vaults on High Street West in Sunderland. Hopefully all the info will be in the bio, and you can click on the link and have a closer look. Hope to see some of you there. And yeah, I imagine I will be back at some stage soon to bring you up to speed with all the latest, maybe after the fixture release in a couple of weeks, or if there's any more significant developments. between now and then. But as ever, thanks so much for watching and see you soon.